I led them with cords of kindness, with the bands of love. And I became to them as one who eases the yoke on their jaws, and I bent down to them and fed them.
Shalom, shalom, folks. It's Brother Tanner from Something to Chew On, coming in, going to give you a read-along update, and hopefully I'm going to give you something to chew on this week. Stick around after I give the update, because I'm on, how do I say this? It's not so much a word of encouragement. It's not really a word study. It's simply me reading the text and expounding on it. Just some things that the Ruach has brought to my mind. And, some of these things you may have realized, you may have heard. Some of them you may not. But I guarantee if you follow through and you listen to this, you're going to get something to chew on and to meditate on. Okay? So I'll go ahead and say right now, if you don't have a Bible and you don't have something to write and take notes with, pause the video and go get you a Bible and, a pen and a piece of paper. And you can just jot down some notes when I'm talking. Like I said, I'm just going to basically, off the top of my head, I'm going to read through this text. I've been reading through this text over and over and over this week because it's what I talked about last week, and I just kept reading through it. All right? But anyway, let's get to this update and get that out of the way, and then we'll go to the scriptures. Okay. Last week, I announced the winner of the prior week was the Book of Acts. Okay. I've got all those videos made, and they've all been uploaded into a playlist on YouTube. That was finished yesterday, and I apologize. It took me a little while. I had something come up this week. That's why I didn't get it done earlier in the week. But it was done, it was finished yesterday. And as always, the link to that playlist and all the other read-along playlists will be in the description below. Okay, let's see. The vote on the table last week, the 13th, was between 1 Chronicles and 2 Kings. And the winner was 1 Chronicles. And so, in between now and next Friday, I will work on those videos, get them made, and upload them to YouTube into a read-along playlist. And there's 29 chapters in 1 Chronicles, so I don't think it's going to take me too long. I'll probably, sometime today and over the next 3 or 4 days, I'll work on this, and I'll get it done. And hopefully it won't be as late in the week as the Book of Acts was. I had something, like I said, I had something come up, and I couldn't sit down and do all this. I had to take care of other matters. But hopefully, we won't have anything like that this week, and I'll get this one done a little earlier in the week. Okay, now, with that said, the vote on the hand this week, like I've said, I've got 1 Kings already done. This is a playlist. It's already on YouTube. So we're going to put 2 Kings back on the table for a vote. And it's going to be between 2 Kings and the Book of Judges. There you go. 2 Kings and the Book of Judges. Vote in the comment section below. There we go. Okay, now, for this, like I said, it's not so much a word of encouragement. It's not a word study. It's simply me reading through the text and thinking out loud, if that makes any sense. But I guarantee you, if you sit and listen, you are going to get something to chew on. Okay? Okay, now what I'm going to do, we're going to go to Exodus 19. For everybody who went and got their Bibles and a pen and a piece of paper, Exodus chapter 19. And I'm not going to read the entire chapter. I'm going to read sections of it. But I'm going to read the majority of it. And then I'm going to go into Exodus chapter 20, where the quote-unquote 10 commandments or the 10 words is, the Decalogue, where that is. And I'm going to just read through this. I'm going to point out a few things. Okay, now with that said, I'm going to pull this up on the screen so you can follow along with me. Excuse me. And if you notice, one side, you'll see at the top, it'll say Exodus 19. That's the chapter we're on. But one side of the screen is going to say TS 2009. That's the scripture version 2009. And then the other side says KJV. Obviously, that's the King James Version. And they're going to be in parallel. So you can see like verse 1 from both versions is right next to each other. So you can read it in parallel. You can compare what each one of them says. I'm going to read that. Me personally, I'm going to read it out of the scripture version 2009. Okay? Like I said, I'm not going to read everything, but I'm going to read the majority of this and just point out a few things here and there. But once I get into chapter 20 and read the 10 Commandments, that's what I'm going to actually, that's the where I'm going with all this. But let's just read this. So read chapter 19 so we get the context leading up to the quote unquote giving of the 10 Commandments. Okay? So let's go. Let me bring it up on the screen. Give me just a second. Make sure everything's good here. Okay, I'm going to bring it up. That way we're going to see the text instead of having to see my ugly mug. All right, here we go. Okay, like I said, you got Exodus chapter 19. This side right here where it says TS 2009, that's the scripture version 2009. Over here, KJV, obviously, King James Version. And I'm going to just start reading. I'm going to just point out a few things here and there. Now, I'm going to read this rather fast, so, keep up. Just listen to what I say, and, you can always go back in your free time and read through this and, chew on some of the things I'm going to point out. Okay, so let's just start. It says, Exodus 19, verse 1, from the scripture 2009. It says, in the third new moon, after the children of Israel come out of the land of Mitzrayim, that would be Egypt, on this day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. For they set out from Rephidim and had come to the wilderness of Sinai and camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain. Okay, now I'm going to just point out something. As we read through this, notice who is camping at the mountain. It says Israel, correct? Doesn't say the Jews. I mentioned that last week when I was reading through this passage, and I'm going to mention it again this week. Notice it says Israel, not the Jews. In fact, if you actually go do a word search for the word Jew and or Jews with an S, in the first 5 books of Moses, the law of the Most High, the Torah, you will not find either the word Jew or Jews in there anywhere. It always says, speak to the children of Israel. Speak to the children of Israel. Command the children of Israel to do this. And Moses, and the Most High spoke to Moses and said, speak to the children of Israel. Nowhere does it say, go tell the Jews to do something. It doesn't say that. A lot of people don't realize that until somebody actually points it out, and then they go and look it up and verify that word Jew or Jews is nowhere used in the Torah. Just let that sink in. Okay, now let's keep reading. We're going to go to verse 3. It says, and Moshe went up to Elohim, and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh called to him from the mountain, saying, that is what you are to say to the house of Jacob and declare to the children of Israel. The house of Jacob, and the children of Israel. Basically, same people. It's talking about the same thing. 2 ways to label the same people. Okay. Verse 4 says, you have seen what I did to the Mitzrites, the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Okay, now this is what I talked about last week. I'm going to just read this real quick. Point out something. It says, and now if you diligently obey my voice, and remember, this is the Most High talking to Israel, right? Okay. Now, let me just throw this in there. When it says Israel at the base of Mount Sinai, who else came out of Egypt with Israel? Was it a mixed multitude? Right? So, These people at the base of Mount Sinai is a mixed multitude and Israel. Israel proper, meaning they are bloodline genetic ancestors of Jacob. And then you have all these people that were in Egypt with him that were not bloodline genetic descendants of Jacob, but they have come out and joined with Israel. Make sense? They have grafted into Israel, basically. Where have we heard that? Romans chapter 11. Okay, but verse 5, it says, "And now, if you diligently obey my voice," Most High speaking, "and you shall guard my covenant, then you shall be my treasured possession above all the peoples, for all the earth is mine." And last week I talked about that treasured possession. If you go to Titus 2:14, where he says a peculiar people. And I said, what does that actually mean? What does that actually look like? Well, that word goes back to this phrase, my treasured possession. If you look over there, over here on the King James side, it says a peculiar treasure, right? So, like I said last week, if you haven't seen that video, I'll put the link to it in the description below, and I'll give you the short and the skinny right here. Titus 2:14 says we are to be a peculiar people. And my question was, what is it that we do that actually makes us peculiar compared to the world? This right here answers it. If you obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people. Make sense? See, when you define that word peculiar and you see what Paul was actually talking about in Titus, it gives it a little more a depth, some sustenance to what he was actually saying. What he's saying is, obey the covenant. Obey the voice of the Most High and keep his covenant. Makes sense? Okay. Like I said, I'll leave the link to the video that I talked about that in the description section. Okay, verse 6, "And you shall be to me a reign of priests and a set apart nation. Those are the words which you are to speak to the children of Israel." Okay, let's look over here in the King James in verse 6. It says, "And ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." Does that sound familiar? 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9. "You are a holy nation and a royal priesthood." Where do you think Peter was quoting and getting that concept from that he wrote in his epistle? From right here. Again, this goes back to when you read your Old Testament, the Tanakh, and you see where these phrases and these words come from, you get a better and fuller understanding of what's actually written in the New Testament. You get some context to what they were writing about in the New Testament. Makes sense? Okay, now let's keep going. All right, verse 7, it says, "And Moshe came and called for the elders of the people and set before them all these words which Yod-Heh-Vav commanded him." Verse 8, "And all the people answered together said, all that Yod-Heh-Vav has spoken we shall do." I do. That's what that is. That's the big I do. So Moshe brought back the words of the people to Yod-Heh-Vav. Right? Right there, what my point here is the Most High is talking to Moses, and Moses is going to tell the people. And the people say, yes, we will do it. And Moses takes the people's agreement, their verbal agreement of we will obey, that's what they're saying, and he goes back and he tells the Most High. See, Moses is acting as a mediator between the people. We understand that? Okay, now, let's see. Let's skip down to, I think it's verse 16. Like I said, please, by all means, go back and read all this stuff in between. But I'm just skipping down for the sake of time. Yeah, on verse 16 right here. It says, and it came to be on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain, and a voice of a shofar or a trumpet was very strong, and the people who were in the camp trembled. Verse 17. Verse 17. And Moshe brought the people out of the camp to meet with Elohim, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. All right, now let's just read that same verse in the King James and see how it says it. Pretty much the same way. Let's just read it in the King James. Verse 17. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the nether part of the mount. So the people, up until now, Moses has been talking with the Most High and relating what the Most High says to the people. But now the people are going to come up to the mount, and they're actually going to hear. Does that make sense? They're going to hear all that's being said. All right. Okay, verse 18. I'm going to read it again over here in the scripture 2009. It says that Mount Sinai was in smoke, all of it, because Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh descended upon it in fire. And its smoke went up like the smoke of a furnace, and all the mountain trembled exceedingly. Verse 19. And when a voice of the shofar sounded long and became very strong, Moshe spoke, and Elohim answered him by voice. Verse 20. And Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh came down upon the Mount Sinai on top of the mountain, and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Verse 21. And Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh said to Moshe, go down and warn the people, lest they break through unto Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh to see, and many of them fall. Basically, the section that I didn't read, basically what's going on is the Most High has told Moses, let the people come near to the mountain so they can hear, but do not let them come up onto the mountain or touch the mountain, because they'll die. But let them sit down at the bottom of the mountain and they can hear all this, right? So they're hearing the actual voice of the Most High. Just as Moses has been hearing it, now too the people are going to hear it. Okay? Now let's look at verse 22. Let me read verse 21 again. It says, and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh said to Moses. So what we're reading next is what the Most High said. He says, go down and warn the people, lest they break through unto Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh to see, and many of them fall. Verse 22. Again, this is the Most High speaking to Moses. Notice what it says. And let the priests who come near Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh set themselves apart too, lest Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh break out against them. Okay, let's read that verse in the King James. Exodus 19, verse 22. Most High speaking to Moses, and the people are hearing. Verse 22, it says, and let the priests also, which come near to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, sanctify themselves, lest Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh break forth upon them. Okay, now let's just stop and let's think about that for a second. We hadn't gotten to where the tribe of Levi was chosen to be priest. We hadn't got to the book of Leviticus with all the rules of all the priests and all that. But yet, right here, basically what I'm getting at is the quote-unquote law has not even been given to the people, as some people seem to believe. But yet, there are people who are designated as priests. Think about that for a second. People want to say, well, the priesthood was such and such and this and that, and the law wasn't given, and, the priest came about after the giving of the law. Really? It says right here that there were priests, and the law has not been, quote unquote, given. something to chew on. I submit to you that the law always was. It was simply given in full and written down here because the people had forgotten it. That's it. Take a note of it. Go chew on it. Go study it out for yourself and see what you come up with. But we've got to let go of these preconceived notions. We have to unlearn what we think we have learned and rely on what the text actually says, not what we've been told it says, not what we think it says, and most definitely not what our flesh wants to twist it into saying. Let the text speak for itself. Make sense? Chew on that for a little while. Go dig into that. Okay, now let's keep reading. Verse 23. And Moshe said to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the people are not able to come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, make a border around the mountain and set it apart. And Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh said to him, come, go down, and then come up, you and Aaron with you. But do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, lest he break out against them. Notice again, it speaks of priests. Verse 25, and Moshe went down to the people and spoke to them. And he tells them, hey, don't break through, don't touch the mountain, just listen to what's being said. Makes sense? If you go back and you read the entire chapter, that little section I left out, that's where it's talking about them. Put a border around the mountain, don't let them come up. And this is basically the Most High saying, hey, go back down and remind them, don't break through that border. Don't try to come up this mountain. Don't touch this mountain because they're going to die. If they do, all they got to do is stand down there and listen. Or as the text says, hear and then obey. Okay, now we're going to go to chapter 20. And I'm not going to read very much of this, but I'm going to point out something. Again, Exodus chapter 20, two versions on either side. I'm going to read, and most of us know this. This is where the quote-unquote 10 commandments are given to the people. But I'm going to point out something. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to point out a few things about this, okay? Like I said, I'm going to read through this rather quickly. I may stop and talk about something, expound on the text, something, but let's just listen to this. He says, and Elohim spoke all these words, saying, okay, now remember, at first, the Most High was talking to Moses. Let's go back to my ugly mug because I want to emphasize this point right here. You have to read 19 to get the context to understand what's going on in chapter 20. Like I said it once, but I'm gonna reiterate it here. If you go back and you read chapter 19, you understand that at that time, the Most High was speaking to Moses, and Moses was talking to the people. And the people agreed, all that you said we will do. So Moses took that word that the people had said, and he went up and he told the Most High. Moses is the middleman between the Most High and the people. He is the mediator. But this right here, all of what you've read in chapter 19, go and cleanse yourself, sanctify yourself for 3 days, don't be with your wife, put a border around the mountain. All this stuff is in preparation for the people to actually hear the Most High speak. They're not listening to they're not hearing what Moses says. Moses is not relaying the message from the Most High. Let's word it that way. The people are now going to actually hear the voice of the Most High. Makes sense? And this is where it begins. The Most High speaks from the top of the mountain, and the people are listening. They are hearing it. It's not Moses hearing it and then coming down and telling the people what the Most High said. The people, Moses, Aaron, the priest, all of them all of the children of Israel and the mixed multitude, all of them are hearing the voice of the Most High speak right here. Okay? That is of utmost importance. Keep that in mind as you read this. Now, let's read through this and let's see. Let's go back to the text. Now, like I said, I'm going to read this rather quickly. Exodus chapter 20, starting at verse 1 from the scripture 2009. It says, And Elohim spoke all these words, saying, okay, let's ask ourselves, who is speaking? Elohim, or as the King James would say, God. The Most High is talking to the people. All of them. Moses, Aaron, priest, mixed multitude, children of Israel, house of Jacob, all of them. They all hearing this. Verse 2 continues. Most High speaking. I am Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Slavery to what? False gods, man-made religion, whatever. However you want to parse that. All right? Verse 3. You have no other mighty ones against my face. King James, verse 3. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Verse 4. You do not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of that which is in the heavens above, or which is in the earth beneath, or which is in the waters under the earth. Verse 5. You do not bow down to them, nor serve them, for I, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your Elohim, am a jealous El, visiting the crookedness of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. Let's think about that for a second. Who hate him? Who hates God? You know, we all say we're believers. And we're like, I don't hate God. Okay. Well, let's just remember the words of Yeshua the Messiah in John, where he says, if you love me, you will obey my commandments. So by implication, if you love the Most High, you're going to obey his commandments. But if you don't obey his commandments, then by implication, you hate him. Will we say that? Okay, let's keep reading. Verse 6, but showing loving commitment to thousands, to those who love me and guard my commandments. Okay, let's look at that verse 6 in the King James. She says, it's showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. You notice how the scripture version 2009 says, guard my commandments, and the King James says, keep my commandments. I would suggest going to do a word study on that word. King James says keep. And when we read that in the King James Version and many of the English translation, we see keep. And that in our mind has the connotation of a strict obedience. I've got to do all these things. Now, I'm not saying, here, let me transition back to my face. Now, I'm not suggesting that we disobey the commandments. Any of them, not just the 10, I'm talking about all of them. I'll get to that in a minute. But we read that word keep, and we so often think it's speaking of a strict obedience factor. But when you read it in this other translation, it says guard. See, that's the thing. That one word has been translated in our English, most English Bibles, as keep, when that is not what that word means. It means guard. Keep has to do with a strict outward obedience to the commandments. Guard has to do with an inner perspective of how we view the commandments. Yes, we are to obey them. Do not get me wrong. I'm not saying we don't obey them. But that's not what that word is talking about. That word is talking about holding the commandments, the covenant, the Torah, the instructions in the correct perspective in our hearts, in our lives. Meaning, I understand I'm supposed to obey these things. Now, I may not do it perfectly. I may slip. I may fall. I may sin, transgress the law. I may sin, but I understand that I am supposed to guard and obey all of this stuff. Makes sense? That's what the word means in the Hebrew. Guard. I understand. There's however many laws I understand I'm supposed to obey. Every one of them that applies to me as a man. Makes sense? I understand I'm supposed to obey them. That's what the word means. It doesn't mean obey them. There's a slight and subtle difference. But when we read our English translations, it's translated as keep, and that in our minds sounds as a strict outward obedience. That's not what the word means. Like I said, do not confuse me. I'm not saying we are not to obey. I'm simply saying that is not what that word means. It means we are to guard. We are to hold in the right perspective all of these commandments, all of these laws, this entire Torah. We are to guard it, understand, hold it in the right perspective in our heart. I am supposed to obey all of this. Now, I may slip, I may fall, I may transgress the law, sin. But I do understand that I'm supposed to obey this. And when I don't, that's when we seek forgiveness. That's what the word means, guard. Do you see the subtle difference there? Okay, I know, I pound that home. But a lot of people, it throws them off. They see it, keep, and they think of a strict outward obedience. No, it means a inward perspective of how you view your relationship to the Torah. But I understand I'm supposed to obey this. This is for my good. It was given to me by my Maker, and this is my instructions on how to live a righteous life that He, my Maker, would have me to live. This is what I'm supposed to do. I am to Shema, hear and obey this. Right? Okay, now let's go back to the text and let's keep reading. Verse 7 right here says, you do not bring the name of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your Elohim to naught, for Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh does not leave the one unpunished who brings his name to naught. Basically, don't take the name in vain. That's what it's saying. Go study that out, what that actually means. Okay, here we go, the one that nobody likes. Verse 8, it says, Remember the Sabbath day to set it apart, to keep it holy, as the King James says, okay? Now, let's just notice this. All the commands up to this point and all the commands after this are pretty brief. There's not a lot of explanations. Don't do this. Don't have any other gods. Don't make any graven images. They're not hard. This one, if you notice, how much text is actually devoted to this one command? Let that sink in. Compared to the other of the quote-unquote 10 commandments. Let that sink in and let that just kind of, If they expanded all this is written about this one commandment, maybe, just maybe, that should signify how important this one is. Don't know. Just consider it. Chew on it. Verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to set it apart. 6 days you labor, and you shall do all your work. Verse 10, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your Elohim. You do not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is with you within your gates. Verse 11, for in 6 days Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart. Do we see how much is written about that compared to how much is written about the other commands? You see how this command got more information than all the other ones, right? Okay. Now let's go. Let's finish this out. Verse 12. Respect your father and your mother, so that your days are prolonged upon the soil which your Elohim is giving you. You do not murder, you do not commit adultery, you do not steal, you do not bear false witness against your neighbor, you do not covet your neighbor's house, you do not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, or whatever belongs to your neighbor. Okay, and that's the end of the quote-unquote 10 Commandments. Now, that, like I said, that was the Most High speaking to everybody. Now, let's see. I'm sorry my dogs are barking, but I'm going to speak up so everybody can hear me. Verse 18, it says, and all the people saw the thunders and the lightnings flash, the voices of the shofar, and the mountain smoking, and the people saw it, and they trembled and stood at a distance, and said to Moses, you speak with us, and we hear. But let not Elohim speak with us, lest we die. Verse 20, I'm going to just read this one. And it says, and Moses said to the people, do not fear, for Elohim has come to prove you, in order that his fear be before you, so that you do not sin. Verse 21, so the people stood at a distance, but Moses drew near the thick darkness where Elohim was. Now, this is what I want to point out. I'm going to point out a few things because this is where I was ultimately going anyway with this section right here. But I had to read 19 to give the context that who was talking and who was listening. Right? We go back and we notice and verse 19. At the end of verse 18, it says, the people stood at a distance. They distanced themselves from the Most High. We catch that. And then they said in verse 19, and the people, talking about the people, and said to Moses, you, meaning you, Moses, speak with us, and we will hear. But let not Elohim speak with us, lest we die. Think about that. They heard the very voice of the Most High. And he started talking to them. He started giving them the covenant rules, the rules of the covenant, the stipulations of the covenant, the marriage vows, if you will. Right? And after he gave these things, the people said, whoa, stop. We don't want to hear it anymore. We're going to die. They were so scared of smoke and the fire and the mountain shaking and the loud noises and lightning and all this stuff. You can go study into all that. But basically the people were scared. They were scared. And they said, no, Moses, you go talk to him. You go talk to the Most High and you come tell us what we said. But we don't want to hear that no more because that's going to kill us. They were scared. They didn't want to hear anything else the Most High had to say. Moses, you tell us. Now let's just stop and let's think about that for a second. How often do you hear people today who say, let's go back for a second. You notice when the Most High started speaking, he gave what most people would call the 10 Commandments, right? Now, do you notice what you do not see in the text The Most High doesn't say, hey, I'm going to give you 10 commandments directly. Then I'm going to withdraw myself. And then I'm going to tell Moses the rest of these commandments that you're supposed to obey. That's not what happens. The Most High simply starts talking, and the people reject the voice. But all they receive is the 10 commandments. We don't want to hear anything else. Moses, you go tell it. You go talk to him and tell us what he says. And the Most High, that's what happens. And Moses goes, and the Most High starts giving Moses all these other commandments. And you realize that people do that today. There are people out there, there's some out there that think we don't even have to obey the 10 commandments. But there are people out there who say, well, all we have to do are the 10 commandments. Nothing else applies to us. We don't have to do all the other stuff. It's only the 10 commandments. The people that believe that are doing the same thing these people did here. After they heard those first 10, no. But what does it say in 19? It says, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant. Nowhere when he started giving the 10 commandments, as they're called, did he say, okay, here's the 10 commandments. This is my covenant. No, the people interrupted him. He had more to say. The people then interrupted him. And today, the same type people interrupt and say, oh, all we got to do is these 10. We don't have to do anything else that comes after that because it's just the 10 we have to do. Think about that. Go chew on that. Okay? Now, think of just that's a huge point. The people, it's not like you could look at it this way, I guess. I hope nobody takes this the wrong way, but it's like, say a teacher, somebody giving a lecture, somebody, whatever, it doesn't matter. Somebody's going to get up and speak in front of a crowd. And a lot of times they're going to give an hour, 2-hour lecture. Usually what they'll do when they start is they will start by giving you a bird's eye overview of what the entire 2-hour lecture is going to be. You know what I'm saying? They'll say something like, okay, in today's lecture, these are the points you will learn. Point 1, blah, 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 blah. Point 2, blah, 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 blah. Point 3, point 4. You see what I'm saying? And then, after they give the overall bird's eye view of what's going to be contained in the entire lecture, they give all these points that summarize the entire lecture. Then they actually go into an itemized, detailed list of all this stuff. Does that make sense? And that's kind of what has happened here. The Most High has given his quote-unquote 10 bullet points. And the people stop him and they don't want to hear nothing else. But he continues and he explains to Moses, and then Moses has to relate to the people, and he gives detailed instructions. Does that make sense? Think about that. We don't reject the lecture and say, it's just the bullet points we have to do. No. The bullet points are an overview of what's coming next. What's coming next is detailed instructions on how to actually do these things. Make sense? Does that make sense? Chew on that. When you read this all in context and you start to think about it, makes a lot of sense. Now, here, I'm going to end on this point. This one, I don't know if I can explain this I'm not sure how to put this into words. But if we go back, here, I'm going to bring it back up on the screen just so you can see this. Let me say this first. For those, most of you most likely will know what I'm about to, what I'm going to say. or the way I'm going to label this. Most of you will know. Some of you may not know. But I'll explain this I'll briefly give it an explanation of this. You have what's known as positive commands and you have negative commands, right? Positive commands are the do this, right? Negative command is don't do this. The thou shalt do and thou shalt not do. Positive, negative. Makes sense? Okay. Now, if we look at the actual 10 commandments, just the 10 commandments, the bullet points of the entire Torah, if you will. Let's go back and look at these. And let's just notice something. I'm going to bring it back up here. Let me scroll back up to the beginning. Okay? And I'm going to just point this out. Notice in verse 3 right here. This is a negative command. Right here. King James, so it makes sense. Thou shalt have no other gods. That's a negative command. Don't do this. We understand that. Okay? Now, as I point this out, you understand that. Okay, the next one, just so you see. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. That is a negative command. Thou shalt not. Do not do this. We understand that. That is a negative command. Okay, now, with understanding that, a positive command is thou shalt do this. Thou shalt not do this. Thou shalt do this. See the difference? Positive, negative. Now, if we look at these commands, these 10 commands, we will notice that, 8 are negative and there are 2 positive. Okay, so now let's just look at these real quick. Like I said, thou shalt have no other gods, a negative command. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, negative command. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them nor serve them, negative command. Thou shalt not take the name of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh thy Elohim in vain, negative command. Right? All those were negative. Number 8, the very first positive command that we are to actually do something is the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. Positive command, meaning you have to do something. The rest of them were don't do. Okay? We catch that. We keep reading. Verse 12. This is also a positive command. Honor thy father and thy mother. Meaning do. Thou shalt do. Right? We get that. It doesn't say that, but it's a positive command. Okay. And then the rest of them are all negative commands. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. So we catch that. Out of the 10 commandments, the 10 bullet points, the 10 overarching commands that everything else is based on, the detailed instructions, these 10, 8 of them are negative. Do not do this, and there's 2 positive. Remember the Sabbath, honor your parents. We see that. 8 don'ts and 2 do's. We'll put it that way. Simple breakdown. Okay, now, I'm going to see if I can explain this. And I pray that nobody takes this the wrong way. I hope it comes out of my mouth and you understand what I'm trying to say here. Because I don't know exactly how to put this into words. Okay, if we go back and we look, let's just, for example, the first couple of ones. Now, I'm not going to break these down. People will say, well, these are talking about how we relate with the Most High, and these are how we relate with humans or fellow humans. I ain't talking about none of that. It has nothing to do with that. Because most people, they break that delineation up in the wrong spot. But anyway. He says, have no other gods. No other mighty ones. No other Elohim. Ain't no graven images. Don't bow down before those graven images. Don't take the name of the Lord. Thy God in vain. We get all that. 4 negative commands. Don't do this. Okay, and then we come to verse 8. The first positive command, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And I'm not going to, I'll throw out the cliche phrase. The very one command we're told to remember is the one that most people forget. Let that sink in for you. Okay? All right. But here's my point. I'm going to see if I can explain this. And this is the ultimate message that I'm trying to get across right here. This right here is the ultimate thing. Once I explain this, I'll be done. Like I said, you got 8 negatives and 2 positives. Okay. In order to obey a negative command, you do not have to do anything. There is no quote-unquote outward action that is shown in obeying a negative command. Don't have a false god. Don't have an idol. There is nothing I have to physically, outwardly do in order to obey that. Does that make sense? But when we get to the positive commands, there is something I have to do. I'm commanded to do something. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. That is something I have to do. I have to actually pursue that commandment. In order to obey that commandment, I have to do something. There is an action I have to do. All the negative ones, in order to obey the commandment, thou shalt not kill, I don't have to do anything. Simply do not kill anyone. Do not murder anyone. I don't have to. There's nothing I need to do to obey that one. And I'll say this. I'll put this as easy as I can. Most people do not have an inclination to actually murder or kill someone. Now, I know somebody's going to say, but Jesus said if you hate, Yeshua said if you hate your brother in your heart, you commit. I get that. I get that. That's why I say don't misunderstand what I'm trying to say here. But to actually follow through with obeying this command, most people do not have the inclination to kill someone, to physically kill them. Now, they may in their heart, and that's a different story, and that's not what I'm talking about here. Same thing with committing adultery, stealing, bearing false witness, worshiping other gods, having an idol. Most people don't have the outward inclination to actually go and break one of these commands by actually doing what we're told not to do. Like in your average week, you walk around and we don't have the urge to kill someone. So it's not a great effort on our part to actually obey that. Why? Because we don't have the urge to do it. Now, granted, we get in a fight, we get in a verbal altercation, hate rises up in our heart, and we have the thought, and yeah, like Yeshua said, you've thought that in your heart, you've done it already. I get that. But that doesn't happen very often. Unless you're just argumentative and you want to argue with people all the time, and then you put yourself in this situation. But for the most part, in an average week, we never have the opportunity to obey or disobey that command. The situation never arises where we need to physically restrain ourselves from breaking that command. Do not kill. You see what I'm saying? We just have our average week of walking around, minding our business, going to work, doing what we do, whatever, and we by actually doing nothing, we have obeyed that command. Does that make sense? There is no physical effort on my part to do anything to obey that command. Just average week, I obey do not kill. I don't have to make a concerted effort to obey that. Why? Because most people don't have the urge to go kill somebody. Like I said, you get in an argument, verbal altercation with somebody. Yeah, hate's going to rise up and I get that. But just in an average week, you don't have to restrain yourself from physically killing someone. There's no effort in you to obey that command. None of them. Have no gods. Don't lie. Or don't bear false witness. Don't covet. Don't commit adultery. There is nothing that we physically have to do in order to be obedient to those commands. Outwardly obey those commands. There's nothing we can do. We simply carry on with our normal work week, and we for the most part, are in obedience to all the negative commands. The positive command. And what is the first positive command? Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. That is the first command out of the 10 that is positive. And that means there is something we have to do in order to actually be obedient to it. Now let that sink in. You will have so many people today say, well, the Sabbath's done away with. We don't have to do it. That was for the Jews. However they want to label it, it doesn't matter. But it's the one commandment that you actually have to do something in order to obey it. And people are like, he did it all. I don't have to do anything. And that's their mentality. Oh, you better not obey. You might fall from grace if you obey. That's a misunderstanding of what Paul is talking about in Galatians, 5? But people, they have so twisted this to where the positive command, go do this, people don't want to do it. But the ones that you don't actually have to do anything, you can sit on your tuchus and not make any concerted effort to show any obligation to obeying anything. People do that just naturally. But the ones that you're supposed to do something, they don't. So hopefully that makes sense. Now here's my thing. Like I said, in an average week, how many times do you get the opportunity to show the Most High that you are willing to obey His commandments? Okay, let me say that one more time. In the average week, how often do you get the opportunity to show the Most High that you are willing to obey His commandments? Now remember, like I said, 8 of them are negative, meaning don't do this. And like I said, those, you don't have to do anything to show you're obedient. You simply carry out your normal life, and you're automatically pretty much obeying those. Now, like I said, there are instances in the heart, and I get all that, but let's just hear what I'm saying. How often in a week do you get the opportunity to show Elohim that you are willing to obey His commandments? All the negative commands go out the window because they don't apply to my question. And the first commandment that is a positive commandment that tells us to actually do something, it falls to that one. The Sabbath day. I don't care how you calculate it. If you're a lunar Sabbath person, or you start at sunset on Friday night, or you start at sunrise on Saturday morning, I don't care. That's not the point. The point is the Sabbath is a weekly opportunity to show you are willing to obey the commands of the Most High. And I don't mean to show the world, the people around you. I'm talking about to show the Most High that you are willing to obey the Most High's command. This is not done as an outward expression for other people to see. Yes, they're going to see it. And that's your opportunity to explain to them, if you love me, obey my commandments. That mentality. But you're not doing it to be seen by men. You're doing it to display your inward love for the Most High by obeying. And in this instance, remember the Sabbath day is a positive command. There is an action that must be done in order to show your obedience to it. So like I said, how often in an average week are you given an opportunity to actually show the Most High that you will obey His commands? You're not. You know, how often in a week do you have to restrain yourself from killing someone? How often in a week do you have to restrain yourself from stealing something? Most of us were raised and we know those things are wrong, and that doesn't even cross our mind. Like I said, you may get in an argument and hate rise up in your heart. I get that. But that doesn't happen every week. Hey, it may happen sometimes. I get it. It may. But it's not a guarantee that you're going to have the opportunity to obey the command, do not kill. But what? You have the opportunity every week, every Sabbath day, however you reckon it, to show your obligation of obedience, your opportunity to obey the commands, to show Him that you want to obey His commands. You have that opportunity every 7 days to make a positive effort in order to obey this command. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Don't do any work. Don't cause your servants to work. Don't cause your animals to work. That is your weekly opportunity to show your obedience to the Most High. That is your weekly opportunity to show your love for Him by obeying His command. Does that make sense? All the other ones are don't do. But this one is a do this. You don't have many opportunities in a week to restrain yourself from lying, restrain yourself from killing, restrain yourself from not committing adultery. That opportunity may come up, but it may not. But I guarantee you, every 7 days, there is an opportunity to positively outward action obey the Sabbath, to remember the Sabbath and to keep it holy. That is our opportunity every week to show the Most High that we are willing to obey His commandments. Does that make sense? It's an opportunity for obedience. Think about that. But with that, I know I've talked a long time this week. But like I said, I guarantee you I've given you something to chew on. Think about it. Like I said, however you want to reckon the Sabbath. Friday at sunset, Saturday at sunrise, or the lunar Sabbath. I don't care. I don't want to argue the points of when you reckon the Sabbath. But if you don't keep the Sabbath, an opportunity is coming today. Many people reckon it at sunset on Friday, all the way to sunset on Saturday evening. They consider that 24-hour period to be the 7th day Sabbath. If you don't keep it, here is your opportunity, your weekly opportunity to show that you are willing to obey the commands of the Most High. This opportunity comes every 7 days. Opportunity to obey the commands of the Most High. Let that sink in. And with that, I'll be done. And I'll say, again, the vote this week is between Judges and 2 Kings. And I'll end this video like I end every one of them. Don't just read this thing, but chew on it. Shabbat shalom, folks.